Okay, this is the hydraulic arm assembly demo. This should be the last sub-assembly of your hydraulic arm project. So looking here at our assembly document, the first part is here. We want to place part 17, part 18, which is our bottom finger, and part 19, our top finger. And we're going to need 2 of part 5, and this is going to form the main finger clamp of our assembly. Get over here to Inventor. Once again, to create a new assembly file, we'll go here to New, and standard inches assembly.iam. Create. Click OK. We'll wait for this to load. While that's loading, let's preview our steps here. We have this section here, part 17. I think this is called the wrist block. We're going to be attaching one of these fingers to it that won't move. And then in the second part of our assembly, we're going to be attaching this finger to it, and it will be able to move. Now, the step-by-step instructions here may be slightly different than what I do in the demo. So when you watch the demo, if the constraints that I use are slightly different, you can use whichever ones you prefer. Okay. Up here, you notice that it says place from content center. We're going to drop down here, and we're going to see. We're going to place. It's taking a while here. Okay, this is not what we want to find. Component. There we go. Let's switch that to the regular place. So if that opens up, okay, once again, if the place from content center shows up, hit this arrow right here, a little small one, switch it to place. I'm not letting it place from your files. Okay, we need to get back to our Inventor folder and our hydraulic arm folder. So here we are, and we're heading for Inventor, and then hydraulic arm. It's Inventor. And Hydra Arm is the current hydraulic arm folder. We need a part 17, one of those. We need to place an part 18. Let's see, well, we need a 9. It looks like I've got them both labeled as part 19, bottom and top finger, so we'll just get one of each. Not sure why I named those as both part 19, but we'll make it work. Zoom out a little bit and place that one over there. Last thing we need is 2 part 5s. So when you place 2 components, you can just click twice, and we're going to drop those over here. We'll get to those later. Escape. Okay, here's all the components we need. And this bottom finger, you see it has that curved back to it. That's intended to rotate. We're going to get to that later. So this will be our second part we use. I'm just going to drag it to over here on the screen. Now the first part we're going to use is this top finger. On this top finger, this hole is going to be inserted into this hole. Well, specifically, they're going to be using insert constraint, but they're actually not going to go inside each other. They're going to go next to each other, and we'll do that in the second step. The first step is one of these surfaces, flat surfaces, is going to be constrained with a mate constraint to one of these. So to do that, we're going to start with our constraint, and we're going to start with a mate to mate constraint, which is surface to surface. We're going to choose this one. Now, I actually need to go and get the other side of this finger here. We're going to get that surface and apply. Now, we're going to go backwards because there's one thing I forgot to do. If you remember our first assembly demo we talked about, we need to ground one part. You notice this part moved. That's actually the part I don't want to move. So we're going to right click on that and ground it. Just put the little pin in it. Now, redoing our constraint, we're going to do a mate constraint between this surface and this back surface. Apply. Now, looking at that, we see we have our part aligned. If we try to drag that part, it's going to slide in and out. It now sits into that slot, but it can move. So our next constraint is going to be insert, and that's going to force these two to line up. On that constraint, insert. Okay, looking at our insert constraint, we have 2 possible solutions. And when we do this insert, it's this option. Remember, we can select either the bottom or top of a cylinder or cylindrical hole. And here we're going to choose this top surface in that axis. Now, when we come over here, we can choose bottom or top. Now, this is the surface or edge of that hole that we want to touch that one. There we go. And that lines them up. Now, before I hit apply, let's just look at what the difference is if we switch it to our aligned. You notice there, nothing really changes because we've already selected which edge will work, and because we've constrained mated the other one, so we can simply click apply. Okay, now, before we go any farther, let's look at what this does. You notice that this is rotating back and forth. In your instructions, it's going to talk about using an angle constraint. I think there's a simpler way to do it. Angle constraint, feel free to do that. It's a good exercise to use a new constraint. What I like to do is simply another mate constraint. It's familiar, and we know how to do it. Because what needs to happen is this surface needs to touch that surface. So that's a fairly simple surface, mate constraint to surface, mate constraint, and apply. Alright, closing it out. Let's go back to our home view. If we look at this, we have our bottom finger, our top finger aligned into our assembly. Now the top finger is going to be very similar, only we will skip that last constraint. So once again, we're going to do a mate constraint, and it's going to be this bottom surface. And if you rotate this, you're going to realize we actually have to use the other side of this bottom finger here in our assembly. Now, as we look at that constraint here in our home view, you'll notice that we have our bottom finger, but it's just going to kind of slide around. It's aligned with that slot, but it can slide anywhere else in space. So to constrain that, we're going to go to our insert constraint. Similar process, we're going to align that top edge of that cylinder hole to the bottom edge of this cylinder hole and click apply. Now that we have that done, you notice that we can freely rotate this bottom finger. Okay. Last thing we need to do is we need to put these pins in, because although we can constrain this in Inventor, in real life those parts would simply fall apart. To hold them in place, we would use these pins. That's an insert constraint. Should be familiar at this point. We're going to line up the axis and top edge of this pin with the axis and top edge of that hole. Now, if that comes in upside down, that means the pin flipped, and we can switch our solution to aligned and click apply. Once again here, top edge, and that one didn't flip. We'll just hit apply, and there we go. Okay, this is the first part of the arm assembly, and I think at this point I'll stop and I'll add a second video to this for the remaining parts of the arm assembly.